All right, today I'd like to inform you all on the greatest league of the greatest sport on the face of the earth, the NHL. Today I hope that all of you learned something that you didn't know about the NHL. So I'm going to start by giving you a little background information. The NHL was founded in 1917 and consisted of only 5 teams. There's the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Wanderers, the Ottawa Senators, the Toronto Arenas, and the Quebec City Bulldogs. The first exhibition game was played, it was a preseason game. It came 10 days after the 1917 Halifax explosion. And that was 4 days before the regular season, so it didn't really count as it was preseason, but it was the first ever exhibition game. Just like any big business that starts off, every event is important because it's the first time the event takes place. So some of the noteworthy firsts were the first Stanley Cup, and for those of you that don't know what the Stanley Cup is, it is the Super Bowl or the World Series of the NHL. And the Toronto Arenas were the first Stanley Cup champions. They won it in the first season. The Senators were the first team to win back-to-back Stanley Cups, and that was in 1920. So it kind of makes sense that they played in the first tie of the NHL, which was 4-4 in 1922. Now the NHL was made up of 2 conferences and 30 teams, the Eastern and the Western Conference. And just like every sport, they have a certain number, which is 8. The top 8 teams go to the playoffs after an 82-game season, regular season, and the top 2 teams from each conference go on to the Stanley Cup to play. Now if you notice, in the Western Conference, there's two less teams than there are in the Eastern Conference. That's because in 2016, they plan to expand the league. They're thinking about putting teams in Quebec City, Seattle, or Las Vegas, which would be the first professional sports team in Las Vegas. There's only 6 teams here that made it through the expansion process between the 1930s and the 1960s when it became really, really famous. And that are considered the original 6 teams, which are the Montreal Canadiens, the New York Rangers, the Detroit Red Wings, the Boston Bruins, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Chicago Blackhawks. But if you notice, the Senators are on there, and they were on my first slide. They're not considered an original 6 team because around 1930 they were bought out, and they didn't come back until about 1994. There was like a big petition in the city of Ottawa for like 2 years, and everybody wanted a sports team there because it's the only big city in Canada that didn't have a hockey team. So now, at the end of each season, they give out a whole bunch of awards to players and teams. Some of these awards, I'm going to go from the top left to the top right and down. It's the Prince of Wales, which is awarded to the Eastern Conference champions. The Clarence S. Campbell, which is awarded to the Western Conference champions. The President's Trophy, which is awarded to the regular season champions, which is, it's not really considered the regular season champions, it's just the team that has the best record of the regular season. The Hart Trophy, which is given to the MVP of the regular season. The Lady Byng Trophy, which is given to the player that exemplifies off-ice character, which is in the community giving back his time when he's not playing hockey. The Vezina Trophy, which is given to the goalie of the year. The Conn Smythe Trophy, which is given to the playoff MVP. It's usually given to a player that's on the Stanley Cup winning team. The Norris Trophy, which is given to the Defensive Player of the Year. The Calder Cup, which is given to the Rookie of the Year. The Bill Masterson Trophy, which is given to the player that best exemplifies dedication to the sport of hockey. The Selke Trophy, which is given to the forward, the best offensive player of the year. The Ted Lindsay Trophy, which is given to the player that all the players vote on. They all have a vote, and they vote on the best player that they think is the best player of the league. And the Jack Adams Trophy, which is given to the Coach of the Year. Alrighty, so the game of hockey. There are a couple leagues that are professional. We have the AHL, the OHL, EHL, stuff like that. But the NHL is the top one, and they play 3 20-minute periods of 5-on-5, not including the goalie. So basically it's 6-on-6. And then if the score is not decided by the end of those 3 periods, they play a 5-minute 4-on-4 overtime, and then they go to a shootout if it's not decided in overtime. which is a 3-round one-on-one with the goalie, which each team gets to decide who's in that process. If the first 3 rounds don't decide it, nobody scores, they just keep going 1-1-1 until the game's ended. Now, that is in regular season where they play the overtime and the shootout. In playoffs, they just keep going and keep doing 20-minute overtime periods, which means that it can virtually go on forever. The game could in the playoffs. The longest game on record was in 1936 between the Detroit Red Wings and the Montreal Canadiens. They played 6 overtime periods on top of 3 regular periods, 20-minute periods. Now, the number one question that people ask me when I tell them that my favorite sport is hockey is how much do they get paid? And you would think that they would get paid just as much as football players do, up to around $20–30 million, but they don't. The ranges from about $141,000 to $9 million. And the top paid player is Alex Ovechkin of the Washington Capitals. He's probably one of the best players in the world. And because they're not paid as much, it kind of leads to conflict between them and management, which is the lockout. And that happens in almost every sport. The latest one was in 2012, and they actually decided in about December, halfway through, that they would agree on a certain number, and they ended up playing half the season, which was 48 games instead of 82 games. So little hockey is better than no hockey. Just like in every business, just like there's firsts and all that, but we have records too. The most games ever played was by Gordie Howe. It was 1,767 games. He was also the oldest player to play. He was 50 years old when he retired. The most goals and points is held by Mr. Hockey, Wayne Gretzky, at 894 goals and 2,857 points. To put that into perspective for you, Mark Lemieux is second in both of those, and he has 801 goals, and he has 1,887 points, so you can see how much greater Wayne Gretzky is. I'm sure you've all heard of Wayne Gretzky if you know what hockey is. Another very common question is, who has the most Stanley Cups? And that is the Montreal Canadiens with 23. So I hope that you all know a little bit about hockey that you didn't know before, and that is the NHL.